live, extreme, local elections, Labour.
It's always worth bearing in mind that, of course, we want BP and others to make profits so they can invest, but these are profits
UK,
they didn't expect to make. These are profits over and above because the world price of energy is so high. The question then becomes,
date today is 2nd of May 2023.
What's the choice that you make in relation to that? What we say in the Labour Party is have a proper windfall tax that's effective and use that money directly to freeze council tax. So this year people are facing council tax increases on top of everything else. People are really struggling with their bills, as you know. We say use an effective windfall tax to freeze those bills. The government, unfortunately, has got loopholes in the windfall tax they put in place, so they're not using that money effectively. And that's why, in the end, this is one of the choices that's going to be on the ballot paper for Thursday, because this is a cost of living crisis election for sure. We've been across the country, as you can imagine, talking to everybody. The number one issue is people saying, look, I can't afford to pay my bills. Stories, you'll have heard them, of people going around supermarkets saying, well, I pick something up, I look at the price, and then I put it back down again. People yesterday saying...
A lot of us have noticed how much things are these days.
Just for 1 hour, but I can't afford to put it on any other.
If you're in a restaurant in Cinder Parks Longley, it's £5 for ice cream.
So this is a cost of living crisis. It's about choices. Labour is choosing to, in this case, use those excess profits, use a proper windfall tax, and use that directly to help people with the bills that they're struggling with. The government, on the other hand, is not doing that. They're making, in my view, the wrong choice. Also, they're not really talking about the issue of the day, which is the cost of living crisis.
Okay, let's talk about, you're talking about what you call a proper windfall tax. The government would say that they're already charging 35% on energy profits. That's that levy that is in place. And that has already raised £4.4 billion so far.
Yeah, the government scheme's got huge loopholes in. So if there's investment back into fossil fuel, if you can imagine, of all the things to put a loophole in, you wouldn't put it in fossil fuel. They put a loophole in for that, which means that that amount of money that's yielded from the tax is much reduced from what it could be. And therefore, they're not able to match what Labour is saying, which is to freeze council tax. This is one of those policies that, in a way, we put on the table. We say this is a fair thing to do. We say to the government, look, if you want to take this policy from us and go for it to help people with their bills, then take our policy, we'll vote for it, and you could do this in a matter of weeks. But that's not a choice the government's prepared to take. And this comes on the back of, I think it's next year is the 13-year anniversary of this government. And for many people, I think they'll be asking that question. Am I any better off after 13 years of this government or not? And across the country, the resounding answer to that question is, no, I'm not. And neither are my streets safer, nor is the health service better than it was 13 years ago when they came into power.
Nurses out on strike on Sunday and Monday. What would you be offering them now?
Well, look, I don't want to see the strike. I don't think anybody wants to see that. NHS users are really anxious about operations that are being cancelled, etc. I don't think nurses want to be on strike. My wife works in the NHS. My mum was a nurse. My sister was a nurse.
Wow.
It runs deep through me.
Blimey.
But, we've got to a situation which is now a complete mess. If you cast our minds back, just before Christmas, when the nurses' strike started, the nurses said to the government, look, if you come into the room and talk to us about pay, we won't go on strike. The government sat that out until the 11th hour and created conditions in which we now arrive at a mess. So I do want to see this sorted out. Don't want to see strikes, very clear about that. I do think at the heart of this is, back to that question, why are nurses taking this action? Why are others taking this action? Because in the end, they're struggling to make ends meet because...
Of course they are.
Well,
same with teachers. The pay isn't right, is it, mate, for everyone? It ain't fair.
But we'd also...
It ain't equal.
The direct comparison, if you like, is perhaps this. We've got now the 13 years of this government. We had 13 years of a previous Labour government. We didn't have a national nurses' strike. We had the highest levels of satisfaction in the NHS, and that's the difference you'd get under a Labour government.
And would you at least, I know you're saying you don't want to negotiate on air basically, but would you at least guarantee a rise linked to inflation?
Well, I'm not going to go into figures on air, and nobody would.
But if you don't do that, if you can't offer nurses that, then in real terms it would be a pay cut still, wouldn't it?
Well, look, we would get in the room, we'd negotiate, and we would compromise. That's the nature of negotiations. That's what happened under the last Labour government. We didn't have a national nurses' strike. I think there's another element to this which is important. There's huge strain on the NHS, as everybody knows. They're understaffed, under-resourced, and through COVID, it was a really, really hard time. As I say, my wife was in the NHS. This was the time when people were doing extra shifts, going in, working really hard. Even on days off, nurses were getting texts to say, "Is there
my friends at the cemetery were overrun.
Exhausted. There's a cost of living crisis," and so we would recognise that and
so would you guarantee an above inflation rise?
Just finish this point, if I may. We would double the number of nurses and doctors coming into the system because there's a staff shortage. And again, this is about choices. So we would have the biggest expansion of NHS workforce, desperately, desperately needed, which would help with the pressures on the NHS. And we would pay for that by getting rid of the non-dom status. This is the status where the super rich can choose not to pay their tax in this country. I think that's wrong. I think if you live in this country, you should be paying your taxes.
Exactly, mate. Exactly.
Directly to give that supply side in for more staff in the NHS, which is a big part of the dispute that's going on.
So would you guarantee an above inflation pay rise?
Look, I'm not going to negotiate a figure on, and a government wouldn't do that either. I mean, negotiations about, neither would the unions, by the way. There's nobody go. It's like trying to buy a house. You don't go into a negotiation to buy a house by saying up front what your final price is. So everybody knows negotiations are where you get in a room, you sort out the issues, do it in good faith, and the one thing I think all of us want to see is an end to these
strikes. Yeah.
Local elections this week.
I see all the train drivers go on strike again.
Labour MPs and Labour supporters are not very happy with the style of campaigning that you've engaged with. The attack ads on Rishi Sunak, comments about his wife's finances and his family money. And they feel it's just all got a bit nasty, coming from a man who said he wanted to clean up politics.
Well, what we've done in this campaign is to hold the government to account for 13 years of failure, because this is a cost of living election. That is the single most important thing on the ballot paper. What are the choices you make on the cost of living?
You've been very personal, haven't you?
I think it's right to point out that we've had 13 years now of this government, and nobody is answering the question, do you feel better off, with a resounding yes. If you ask people about the NHS, there's nobody, I doubt you'd get anybody on this programme coming on saying the NHS is now better than when they took over 13 years ago.
No, it's not any better, it's worse.
In a safer place. So I think it is important to hold people to account. The campaign itself has been positive, and we go into those elections 48 hours now till it's actually election day. We go in good spirits.
It's all you can do, my friend.
By 12:30 a.m. on Friday, we'll begin to see the results, and I will be measuring whether we're making progress from 2019, when we had a very.
I'm sure you and Labour and Liberal Democrats will do well.
To ensure that we can take the Labour Party from a failure in 2019 back into government, and then actually bring about the changes that we've been arguing for on the cost of living. And I detect across the country that there's a strong sense of people saying we do need change now. This really isn't working. We need change.
You need to get rid of this zombie government.
Another 5 years of this, Keir. It's bad.
Aye.
It's interesting. The polls suggest you will do well this week. The Labour are far ahead, and I know you say you don't take that.
Opinion polls wise.
What is interesting, though, is that when it comes to personal ratings and comparisons, you versus Rishi Sunak, you're not so far ahead. In fact, it's pretty even on some issues. Why is it, do you think, that you as leader aren't doing as well as Labour as a party?
Well, as leader of the Labour Party, I got elected just 3 years and 1 month or so ago, and I had one job and one focus.
You've done a good job to fix your party up, let's put it that way, Keith.
Into government. Now, when I actually took over as leader, most people shook me by the hand saying, "Good luck, Keir." And in the next breath said, "But it is impossible to take the Labour Party from where it's landed in 2019 back into government in 5 years. It's not possible." I said, "Yes, it is. If we change the Labour Party, if we expose the government and their 13 years now failure, 14 by the time we get to the election, and we put a positive case for change, then I think this is doable." I'm really glad that the challenge I got 3 years ago in media interviews was, it's not possible here, is it, realistically, to do it in 5 years? Now the challenge to me is, why aren't you further ahead? Tracking against that 3 or 4 year trajectory into next year, we're making really good progress, and I'm glad I'm getting challenged on why we're not further ahead. That's a good place for us to be. I'm single-minded. I'm focused on taking us forward. I'll be looking at the results this time around. I have to say the government needs to show real improvement, because the cycle we're on, as you know, is a 4 year cycle. So the last set of elections, when this these millions of people went to the polls was 4 years ago. That was the second worst election result for the Tories since ever. It was Theresa May's sort of dying days. As a result of those elections, she had to go out and apologise to her candidate.
Hi.
So if the Tories don't make significant advances on May 2019, then they're going backwards.
A lot of this, you're downplaying your expectations, they're downplaying their expectations.
I'll just say this because you put Rishi Sunak to me. It can't be true that Rishi Sunak is sort of resurrecting the Tory party and steaming ahead at the same time as the Tory party briefing that they're going to do worse than they did in May 2019, when, as a result of which, Theresa May actually was removed from office. Both those things can't be true.
I've heard you refer to yourself previously as Mr. Rules. You like sticking to the rules, don't you? So I'm curious to know what you think about something we're expecting to hear today, which is more about the appointment of Sue Gray to come and work for you. Sue Gray, of course, the person who at one time was investigating the Prime Minister.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Did she break any code of conduct by talking to you, by talking about that job, while she was also doing something else?
Firstly, I had no discussions with her while she was investigating Boris Johnson whatsoever. I don't think anybody is suggesting that that is the case. I'm confident she hasn't broken any of the rules. Whenever a senior civil servant leaves the civil service, there's always a process they have to go through before they take up another job. That's the process she's going through, quite rightly too, the process I would expect her to go through. Actually, today, there's nothing much new about this, and I'm afraid with 48 hours to the election, what's going on is the government is trying to sort of resurrect a story about Sue Gray, mainly because
they're desperate
to talk about the cost of living crisis, which actually is the thing that most people are most concerned about.
Exactly.
Do you think this is a timing issue?
Oh, look, you have to smile when the government raises an issue like this with 48 hours to go before the polls.
Because they know it could potentially damage you.
What I'd say to the government is, if you're listening to people across the country, they're not talking about Sue Gray, they're talking about not being able to pay the bills. For heaven's sake, talk about the issue, which is of central concern to, I would have thought, most people watching this. They're not sitting at their breakfast talking about Sue Gray, they're talking about their
cost
bills.
of living.
And if the government focused on the right choices, then
Aye, you said it, mate.
Talk about the coronation as well, aren't there? A lot of people, as we head towards the weekend, which you have to attend once you've had the election results.
It'll be a privilege. It'll be fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, you've said that as a younger man, you once proposed the abolition of the monarchy. I guess this week is forcing us all to ask what kind of monarchy we want going forward. Would you be keen to modernise it even further than the King is doing, to slim it down even more?
Well, look, I'm a strong supporter of the monarchy. I think it's really important to have a head of state that sits above politics, if you like, and is able to bring the country together. And we saw that when the late Queen died last year. I think it was incredible, the outpouring, millions and millions of people across the country. I want this weekend to be the beginning of the next chapter, if you like, of that, and an opportunity.
If you like this video, please follow that. Be subscribed to Chance San Jones. I'm a force reviewer. It's quite my spot on the needs of the money. Wayne, this is my friends Barky and Jimbo on the ITF Right Feeling. So here's a resolution. If you fry it, freeze fry pan. And this is my last show, Sunday at 9 and 12 p.m. Which on the Matt on the Wogan Radio station. If you like this video, please subscribe to Chance San Jones. I'll be happy. Bye, everyone.